today we have Amanda Price, your representative, and you're the House of the Education Committee, or you're the chair of the House Education Committee.
Yep.
And I figured we could just start with how you got into politics and what interested you in it in general.
Really, elementary school, we had student council, and I first ran for, I think, Secretary of Student Council or something back in 5th grade, and then in student council in it must have been 6th grade, and then in junior high, and then high school, and so initially, but then I guess bigger time politics. I started volunteering for some presidential campaigns and congressional campaigns way back in my early 20s. And then when we moved to West Michigan, I met a woman who was named Jessie Dahlman. And Jessie, when we moved here, was chair of the County Board of Commissioners and worked for Congressman Fred Upton in his Holland office, and then soon after that she decided to run for state representative, and I ran her state rep campaign. My friend Patty Burkholz decided, she was county commissioner, or excuse me, county treasurer, and she decided to run for the House, and I ran her House campaign, and then she ran for the Senate, and I ran her Senate campaign.
And where did you grow up? Where are you from?
Was born in Lansing, and my parents moved to Traverse City, where one of my sisters was born, then to Sault Ste. Marie, where another sister was born, and then to San Jose, California, where another sister was born.
Wow.
So we lived there for several years, moved back to Michigan when I was in 5th grade because my mom had had breast cancer and wanted to be closer to her family. And
So what was it like growing up with three sisters?
oh, like, fights over clothes and funny drama scenes, and just it was fun.
Yeah.
But it was kind of, my two younger sisters were very funny.
Yeah.
So-
Okay. And what are they in politics? Is this a family thing?
No, not at all. My sister next to me, and I'm the oldest, and my sister next to me is a physical therapist, occupational therapist. And then the sister after that passed away about 9 years ago. She was an alcoholic and died of that disease. And then my youngest sister is a waitress and a baker out in California.
Oh, how about that?
Yeah, so not at all. Although my sister Becky, who's next youngest in age, lives in Whitefish, Montana, and is, I think, closely monitoring the happenings of their city council.
Okay.
Well, I'm just kind of curious of what the everyday tasks or what you do on an everyday basis or what's in your schedule as a representative.
Well, no day is ever the same, but it usually starts out, I'd say, on a typical Tuesday, I leave my house probably about 6:30 in the morning and drive to Lansing. I'm in a series of meetings till my first committee meeting, which is at noon. You're in committee for an hour, then you go to caucus, which is all the Republicans get together, all the Democrats get together and talk what's going to happen in session for that week, and then you go into session. And session, it can last 2, 3, sometimes 10 hours, and then you finish that, and if it's finished like 2 or 3 in the afternoon, you go back to more meetings, and then you have dinner meetings.
Oh, man.
And then a lot of times I stay with my in-laws when I'm in Lansing, so I don't drive back and forth. It's just would be about 4 hours of driving for me every day, and
Yeah.
it's too much. So I stay with my in-laws, and so a lot of times after those dinner meetings, I go back and work till 10 or 11 at night, and then start the next morning. But on Mondays and Fridays, typically, I have meetings. Chamber of Commerce has breakfasts. The home builders have breakfasts. And you're going to those, meeting with constituents, having office hours. I have 3 different office hours every month.
It's where people can come talk to you about concerns, and I know that I think some of those happen right here in Spring Lake
At
at
the
the library.
yeah.
So, and those happen on a regular basis. And
Every, I'm trying to think, I think it's for Spring Lake, I think it's the 3rd Friday at 9.
So these other meetings that are happening, those are, I mean, I would love a glimpse of what those are like, or who's even calling those. These are all different committees you're on, or they're constituents, you said, and there are
Not necessarily.
Okay.
No, it's typically, so to give you an idea, it's not, I chair the education committee, but usually like Tuesday will be a whole series of meetings about education, bills that are coming up, bills that we're planning to take up. Are people ready to have testimony on those pieces of legislation? But the other meetings are lobbyists, for instance, telling me about a particular bill coming up or wanting my feedback on another bill. So it may not even be my committees that I sit on. I sit on 5 different committees, and so it might be an energy bill that's coming up or a tax policy bill. Any given day, you probably have 10 to 12 different subject matter meetings.
Incredible.
And you have to, I keep saying, if you weren't ADD before this job certainly makes you that way, because you have to blip in and out of thinking and subjects and with people. And
So how do you balance all of that work with pleasure?
it's one of those things where both my husband started his own business a couple years ago, so we are both in the 60 to 70 hour a week
Yeah.
job mode. And so I think our big pleasure is just being around our grandkids.
Oh, yeah.
And so that's on the weekends, and once in a while somebody will ask you to a Michigan State basketball game or something, and so that's the highlight for me, is to go see MSU basketball.
Yeah. How many grandkids do you have?
I have 3.5.
Oh.
So another one
Is the half on the way?
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
That's
So
awesome.
Excellent. Ranging from what age? I mean,
Evie's 6, and she's in
Fun.
1st grade, and then Braxton's 4, and Camden is 18 months.
Yeah, great.
So
Great. So you mentioned that you chair the education committee. What are some of the things that make you excited about chairing that, and some of maybe the drawbacks or the concerns, I guess? If you could just talk about chairing that committee, and how many people are even on that committee?
there's 17
Okay.
reps on that committee, 11 Republicans, 6 Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
I have vice chair, both on the Republican side and the Democratic side. So it's one of those committees that people, at least in my experience, don't particularly like to chair education. It is very political and very contentious. Everything we do, it seems like, is political. And in the terms of since I've been in office, we've done a lot of reforms to education,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them have been quite controversial. In the first year, we did tenure reform. We've done the emergency manager legislation that affects school districts. We did MIPSERS, which is the teacher's retirement system. Did a little bit of that reform. That didn't necessarily come through Education Committee, but we've done a lot of what I would call really heavy lifts around education. And now into my term, we're not doing so much the large reforms, but we've put into place the teacher evaluation system, which came out of the tenure reform. So 4 or 5 years ago, teachers grew in tenure just by how long they'd been in place. I mean, the longer you were here, the more you got paid, the more, and rather than being evaluated on how they're performing. So that started this process of teachers being evaluated on their performance. And at the same time, there was some legislation to do with evaluations, but it never passed. And so this year, that piece of legislation finally passed, both the House and the Senate, and was signed into law. That was probably our biggest lift of a piece of legislation this far in education, because it has wide-ranging effects on your livelihood and how you're going to be an effective teacher.
Have you had any like amazing moments where you've passed a reform that you really agree with, or just maybe seeing something that you just loved, made you love your job?
Well, anytime I'm in schools, I love my job, because typically I'm reading to kids or seeing what's going on in schools, or when kids come to the Capitol. I'm not kidding. I'm not telling you that to shine sunshine up your skirt. I do love it when you can see kids, and I love going into the classrooms and reading. One of the most amazing, I think, pieces of legislation we've passed is the right to work legislation, which gives people a choice whether or not they want to join a union to have that job. And the reason I think that is because Michigan is a very strong labor state, and I never thought that piece of legislation would pass in Michigan. So if I have to go back in 20 years from now and think of the highlight, it's not my bill at all. It was a lot of other folks worked to get that passed, but that would come back. No, I think we've done a lot of other really good things, like pass a budget 5 years in a row that's balanced and early. That hadn't been done for a number of years.
So how do you go about making those choices when you're looking at a bill? When you know, like, well, there are positives to this and there are negatives. You just look at what outweighs. I mean, how do you work through that challenge, I guess?
A lot of times legislation that gets put forth and gets past the committee process and onto the floor, I'd say 90 to 95% of it passes. 100%. People are voting. It's a good bill. It's good legislation. And so you may see the downside of it, but generally it has an upside.
Well, like Mr. Tooney said, he's kind of curious on getting a glimpse into just your career and everything. And earlier you'd mentioned caucuses and all the meetings and everything. And since you've been in this since 2010, if you're allowed to divulge, like not like any specific information, but what is sort of, when you're with the Democrats and the Republicans in those caucuses, what is that like?
Well, you have a schedule of the bills that'll be voted on that week in session. And so the committee chair will, if there's a bill coming up from, like tax policy, the committee chair will stand up, talk a little bit about it, and if the bill sponsor happens to be a Republican, that person will likely stand up and talk about the bill, say why it's a good bill, or why you should vote for it. And then it's kind of throwing it out there, and people will, if they agree with you, they really don't say too much, but it's a big time for just arguing. Holy smokes. Sometimes you just pray legislation makes it through caucus, because it has to make it through that kind of gauntlet before it will even get to the floor.
But I guess, is there a way, because that's what I feel too watching politics, is there's just so much anger. Is there a way do you think, or how would you, if you ran the whole thing, cut through the anger to, I don't know.
Well, and this is me, so I'm almost 60, so I have a different perspective than both of you. You're younger. I think Congress used to be a body where if you were elected to Congress or to the House or the Senate, you spent a lot of time in Washington. You got to know your colleagues quite a bit and quite well. Lots of folks had across-the-aisle relationships, really strong friendships. Same thing in Lansing. Before we had term limits, I think we had a lot stronger friendships and people that you may not disagree with a Democrat, but you are good friends. With term limits and now with Washington representatives coming home mostly on the weekends, you don't have an opportunity to create those relationships. So I think it's fomented more anger and less respect for each other. And so what I try to do is get to know people pretty well, especially ones on my committee that I chair.
What is, in your opinion, the most important part about empathy? Why does the world need it, especially right now with stuff going on, different situations and everything?
I think we are, in society today, we're much too quick to judge people based on appearance, social media, class, income level. And so I think having empathy for anybody in any situation, when I hear the word empathy, I immediately think that I'm looking at life through their lens and not my own. And so you begin to understand kids in your school who may come to school kind of sloppily dressed, and maybe their parents are alcoholics like my dad was, or maybe they're just struggling financially, or maybe the person sitting in the back room not talking hasn't had anything to eat. And so it puts a different, it takes you out of the role of judging somebody and really accepting them.
That's terrific.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you
for
so
coming.
much.
You're
That was
welcome.
awesome.
Yes,
welcome.
and Happy New Year,
Yeah.
and that's the share chair.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Share Chair. Stay tuned next week for a new one. Also, check us out on Facebook and Twitter for regular updates at The Share Chair. And if you're interested in having a piece of your writing or an experience shared on the podcast, contact Elise McGannon at 203-505 at springlakestudents.org.